Dr. Sagar Dhara started to work for the underdog from his early years at IIT Mumbai in the 70s. Even though he always had a job, his unselfish side has always remained active, working for several people's movement for free. Though Sagar Dhara has 30 defamation cases filed against him in courts across India, he does not let them bog with him. The former environmental engineering consultant to the UN Environment Program, Sagar Dhara, is with us today to share his life and how we Montfortians can help the world from destruction. So on behalf of our Superior General, Brother John Kalarikkal, Assistant General, Brother Pratap Reddy, in charge of our education, other Assistant Generals, Brother George, convener of All India Association of Montfort Schools, and all the brothers of our India, I welcome Dr. Sagar Dhara to this conference. I request all the brothers to
Your mic is muted, Brother Thambi.
Brother Thambi.
Your microphone is muted, Brother Thambi.
Okay. I said I welcome Dr. Sagar Dhara to this conference. I request all the brothers to welcome him with a huge round of applause. So kindly unmute yourself and applaud for him, please.
Thank you.
I also welcome Brother Varghese Tekanath, Director of Montfort Social Institute, who doesn't require any introduction because he too is a well-known personality worldwide. May I request Brother Varghese to be the chair for this session. Dear Brother Varghese, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brother Thambi, Alex, for the welcome and the introduction of our speaker today. We as Montfortins, Montfortin educators, as Montfortin climate activists gathered this morning are concerned about the global crisis that remains the existential threat of our times today. It is being paralleled today by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is impacting children and youth as never before. And we are precisely involved with children and youth, and that makes our concern even graver. The two crises are hitting the poorest and the most vulnerable the hardest, acting as multipliers and intensifiers of poverty and inequalities. This includes ever starker gender inequality. We have tried to bring together speakers over the next 3 days, that is today, tomorrow, and the day after, who will put the focus on climate change and explore the connections that have caused the crisis, as well as the interplay with the COVID pandemic. Even more importantly, the speakers will explore how to respond to this crisis through their own life examples of involvement, their own examples of innovation, initiative, and scaling. At the end of the 3 days, we will have learned a great deal through examples of involvement of our speakers. But we should not remain learners only, but doers, because that is what matters at this time in our history. Inspired by our Montfortin charism, inspired by the call of Pope Francis to care for our common home, the earth, and inspired by our congregational initiatives of our recent past, as Brother Pratap so succinctly described to us this morning. Our speaker today, as Brother Thambi already introduced, is Sagar Dhara. a friend, and a well-wisher of Montfort Social Institute is, but all Montfort brothers and our institutions. He not only agreed readily to be the speaker this morning, but also practically got this program together, including finding great speakers who will appear before us tomorrow and day after. So I must begin this session by Sagar Dhara with thanking him for what he has been to us in organizing this conference. Climate crisis is waging around us increasingly in violent ways, compounded by systemic violence. We are seeing wildfires and hurricanes. We are seeing droughts and floods. We know that those who have contributed the least to the climate crisis are the people who suffer the most. Sagar Dhara will explore the white canvas on which the climate crisis is written. He will explore its reasons, its effects, and responses, inviting us to respond to this existential crisis that the world has never faced. We have to do it individually and also collectively, drawing from our Montfortian charism and as global citizens. Those of us who are on Zoom, I request that all of you keep your mics muted so that all of us are able to focus on the speaker of this morning. And I know there are hundreds of others who are joining us on YouTube and the Facebook. So welcome to all of you to this very important session. If you have questions, please put your questions on the chat in the chat box. I shall be keeping track of the chat box so that the speaker at the end of his intervention will be able to answer at least some of these questions. So it is all, the floor is all to you, or all for you, Mr. Sagar Dhara. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Varghese. This is a okay. Right. I hope you can see the slides. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Sagar.
Okay, you can hear me clearly?
Yes.
Right. I was, quite flattered with the introduction. I didn't know that you found out so much about me. Normally, many of these things only a few family members really know. But, I would prefer to be given the enormity of not just the climate crisis, but what we face today. I think, where I studied or where I worked and what I did or what papers I wrote or what books I contributed to is now meaningless. And I prefer to be known simply as one of the persons who has contributed to creating the problem. The huge problem that we have in front of us, in fact, such a massive problem, I and some of my friends, both here and abroad, often wonder whether human society will even survive, in fact. It's not just a problem of climate, it's a problem of our relationship with nature. It's a fundamental issue which philosophers, theologists, sociologists, economists, engineers have attempted to grapple with, but clearly not found appropriate answers as yet. So my introduction is out here. I'd like to be known as a simple guy who's a member of the most ferocious species that ever stalked the earth, and that has created all these problems. I will explain why as we go by. I always like to start with a story and also end with a story. I don't know if I will have enough time to tell you all the stories I like to tell. But I'm going to start with the story of the Kaveri conflict, which, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are fighting it out. Now, they didn't fight it out, let us say, 50 years back, or let us say 300 years back. There was no fight at all because there was enough water, there were few people, and people in Tanjavur used the water, but people in Karnataka had not used the water at that point. Okay, so I'm going to go into a mythological story. It's a mythological story, so whoever knows what the truth is really. But it's a story that has gained currency in Karnataka. Now, I was in Bangalore, in fact, when tires were being lit in Bangalore, asking for what did we stop to from being sent to Tamil Nadu and so on. So how did the Kaveri really start, according to this mythological story? So, there was this demon called Surapadma, and he got very angry because Indra the god was passing through his land, and Indra did not take a visa and have his passport stamped. So he sent Varuna, the god of water, to throw Indra out. But Indra is a very smart fellow, and he managed to escape. So he told Varuna to use scorched earth tactics to make rains fail and so on. And what happened was there was a lot of famine, hunger, disease, death, and so on that happened. Now, Agastya Muni was passing by, the sage, and he saw this terrible destruction. And obviously, he was very moved. And Munis do what they can do best, they pray. And so he prayed to Shiva and asked for a boon. And Shiva was very happy and gave him a boon. He gave him a kamandalam and said that wherever you sprinkle this water, a huge mighty river will flow. And so he, Agastya Muni finally, actually Ganesha, did the job for Agastya Muni. He toppled the kamandalam when Agastya Muni was somewhere near Talakaveri, and a huge mighty river, the Kaveri, started from there. But the boon really had a rider to it. What Shiva said is that this water is not just for humans, but for all other living creatures and non-living things as well that require water. Because water is a medium which is used by what are called the biogeochemical cycles as well. Now, somewhere down the line, both Karnataka and Tamil Nadu forgot the boon altogether and thought that that water is only for humans. I am narrating this story because I want to go back. I'm not bothered about, Shiva's boon, but I'm bothered about the content of what was said, that nature is not just for human beings, but for all other living things as well as non-living things. Without them, in fact, humans won't exist. Somewhere down the line, we have forgotten that. So, and we have become very violent. And this violence, in fact, dates back to literally thousands of years. I would say it is very visible for the last 10,000 years, ever since primitive agriculture started, and definitely much starker after settled agriculture started about 5,000 years ago. So when we look at recorded history in terms of what is the amount of forest land we have or we had, we've cut down something like about a third of the total forest. And how much energy did we use to cut it down? We did a calculation on this and found that for the last 8,000 years, every year, we've used that much energy as is available in 20,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. That's a massive amount of energy that we've used to cut those forests. Cutting forests is not just cutting forests. It means that we have actually warred against nature for our own benefit. And there is an enormous amount of violence that we have caused nature. And that's gone into our blood. Now, this is the point I'd like to make. This is World War Zero, which precedes World War I, II, III, or IV, or whatever else is to come. And it's a massive amount of energy that we've used. In fact, to war against nature, to fulfill not just our needs, but our wants. That is what we've done. And climate change is one part of the story. Okay, so what have we done? We've used science, which models nature, and technology, which uses those models in order to extract resources and energy from nature. And we have grown, particularly in the last 300 years after the Industrial Revolution began. And we have grown not just in terms of extraction of minerals and energy, but we've used that in order to create transport, create other goods, other services, and expand our population, and so on and so forth. Today, we use energy which is well over 50,000 times more than what we used 10,000 years back. That is where we are today. But then, one of the things that economists forget, and I will come to a little bit of economics a little later, somebody earlier referred to ecological economics, or maybe one of the documents I read referred to ecological economics. I will refer to it a little later. But common sense tells any school child, in fact, that the earth is finite and that there are limits to growth. And we are reaching those limits. What we've done actually is, instead of using just the interest that nature can give us, we've ended up using the capital that nature has. And in the process, we've depleted nature quite a bit. And we are at a point in history where it's a question of survival. I mean, if we go just a little bit further, in fact, the very survival of human society and human beings as a species is probably going to be at risk. Maybe not in the next 100 years, maybe not in the next 200 years, but if we proceed along the same lines, certainly we are putting the entire species is at risk. Now, what we need to remember is planet Earth will remain regardless of whether there are humans or not. Humans cannot remain without planet Earth. That is for sure. Okay, so we have three sectors of the ecosystem. You have the first sector, which is really part of the environment, where we extract raw materials and energy. Some of the energy comes from outside the ecosystem because it comes from the sun. So we get our raw materials, whether it be ores or whether it be wood or whether it be whatever else, you know. And we combine energy, we use energy on the raw materials, and in the production and economic subsystem, we make goods and services. And then we use those goods and services and we throw out the wastes. Now, the problem has always been, for a long time, ever since the last 5,000 years, ever since slavery began, in the center, because that is where inequality got created. Some were owners, some were just workers. Okay. But there was no problem at the other two ends. That is where you have global resources and where you have the sinks for the wastes, which is really the environment. Today, the problem, the crisis has begun to occur at these two ends, because there is a shortage of what is visible is water, but what is not really immediately visible, which I will talk about a bit later, is an enormous amount of raw materials are in fact going to get into short supply within 50 years or so. And the sinks, which as long as, you know, the environmental degradation is local, the local people suffered. But there are three categories of air pollutants. You have local air pollutants, you have what are called regional air pollutants, and you have what are called global air pollutants. Global air pollutants are the greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane and so on. And they have concentrated sufficiently in the atmosphere for us to get alarmed. So we have a crisis in all three dimensions of the ecosystem. Now, let me talk about the first part of the system, you know, where we have the source. What a lot of people don't know is that oil, this is what is called peak oil. If you see the red bars, these are the discovery bars. The black curve that you see here, this is the production. There is always a gap between the discovery bar and the production. And what you see is that the discovery bars are coming down. And despite the fact that we have discovered how to get oil and gas out of shale, there is absolutely no doubt now in the minds of scientists that in fact oil production has already peaked and is now going to decline anything like about between 2 and 3 or maybe even 4% per annum now on. And what is going to happen is oil is going to get over in approximately 50 years, gas in about 60 years, and coal in about 100 years. And we have no replacement. And some of the work that I have been doing and publishing, in fact, is what is the status of alternate energies. The fact is that solar energy or wind energy or nuclear energy just cannot replace fossil fuels, just cannot. We have only 100 years, maximum 150 years of uranium ore in order to basically fuel the existing reactors, after which we do not have any uranium ore. We have, but it will not be economic to extract it. Likewise, when you look at, I'm not, this lecture is not about resources, so I'm not getting into that very deeply, but just to mention to you that people think that, oh, solar energy is going to provide us an alternate source. There are a lot of technical problems with solar energy. Leave aside that, the fact is that there are certain materials like copper, which are going to get over in a matter of 50 years, which are going to not get over, but exhaust out and get into short supply. So once they get into short supply, uh, what is going to happen is that what are you going to connect your PV panels with to the grid? So you have a similar story with other conductors like aluminum. Aluminum, of course, is not a very good conductor, but well, if you want better conductors, then you have to replace copper with silver or gold. Well, let's see if the world is able to do that. So there are enormous problems with alternate energies. For example, wind. Now, there is a rare earth that is used in the permanent magnets that are used in wind generators. And that is going to get into short supply within about 30 to 40 years from now. So what are the magnets going to be made of? Now, I've always come across people who say, but humans are very inventive, they will find something. I certainly would like to know what is going to replace, fossil fuels, because we have been looking at all the things that people have been talking about. Hydrogen, in fact, it takes 5 units of energy to get 1 unit of energy out of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very dangerous substance. I've actually handled hydrogen in refineries and so on as a consultant. It's not a substance I would like to handle at all. And so on. There is absolutely no replacement, in fact, for fossil fuels. Now, the other part of the story is that a lot of ores, 80 critical ores, in fact, are going to start exhausting out in the next 30 to 40 years. So not a lot of non-renewable resources, in fact, are things that we are not going to see around. And this includes iron, in fact. Iron is going to get into serious short supply within about 70 to 80 years. As you can see from this graph, by 2040 or so, that is about 20 years from now, you're going to get into what is called peak production. And then production will decline. Then you'll have to use wastes and so on. So you can see another graph here of how a lot of non-renewable ores, in fact, are going to exhaust out. What happens when energy particularly starts exhausting out? Civilizations collapse. This is very recent research being done by, anthropologists and energy scientists and so on. I've shown 2 pictures here. One is the Mayan civilization on top. In fact, more than a dozen civilizations in history have collapsed because of energy collapses. The Mayan civilization lost its energy source. And within a matter of 100 years, the entire civilization collapsed. So did the what is called the Polynesian civilization. As you can see on the Easter Island, all these guys looking at God knows what. There are many stories about it, but the entire Polynesian civilization, in fact, collapsed. It's a very interesting story. I won't get into the details as to how they collapsed in a very short while. Now, the Indus Valley civilization and many other civilizations too have collapsed for the same reason. If you look at the Western Roman civilization, unlike the Byzantine civilization, they too collapsed because of energy collapses. So energy collapses is not something which is something we're going to see in the near future. We can learn from the past as to what happens when there is an energy collapse. The entire civilization collapses. And today's our civilization is global. So if you have an energy collapse, your collapse is not local like what happened to the Mayan civilization, but is going to be global. The second tipping point is climate change, and I will spend a little more time on climate change because that is the main topic for today. So what is the Paris Agreement say? Actually, it says only 2 things. That it says that let us try to limit warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees, preferably under 2 degrees, if possible under 1.5 degrees. Actually, we've already shot the 1.5, though we are 1.1 degree above global average temperatures, 1.1 degree above pre-industrial times. If you, because sulfur dioxide and such other cooling agents in the atmosphere are actually contributing to a cooling of about 0.3 to 0.4 degrees Celsius. If we remove, clean up the air of these substances like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide and some of the particulate matter and make the air cleaner, in fact, we will be today, even today, we will be roughly about 1.4 to 1.5 degree above pre-industrial times. The other thing that the Paris agreement says is that each country may do it whichever way they like, and they make a pledge, and that pledge is non-binding. Now, the latest assessment, as you can see, is which are the regions and countries which are being able to actually stick to the 1.5 degree compliance that the Paris Agreement talks about. The darker the shade, the less the compliance. As you can see, Russia and Saudi Arabia, these are the countries which are absolutely non-compliant. And India, till some time back, the assessment was that India was sort of compliant to some extent, about it was compliant to 2 degrees, but today it is not compliant. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in many, many places on this. Now, had we today, if you look at the latest IPCC report that was released in August, the rate at which we have to actually decrease our greenhouse gas emissions is approximately 7%. The 7.6% is what UNEP talked about 2 years back. It is approximately 7% right now, because we have to become net carbon zero by 2050, which means that whatever carbon dioxide we are releasing should also be taken back in. And the models that have been used to do this kind of modeling, in fact, have used technologies which have not really been validated. Again, I won't get into the details of all these things, but what I say is that we have to become net carbon zero using natural sequestration rates, 2030 for developed countries and 2040 for developing countries. Now, if we delay, this reduction of emissions even by 5 years, then the rate at which we have to come down exceeds 15% per annum. Now, we are growing at about 1.2% per annum right now. Our emissions are actually growing at 1.2% per annum. We have to come down by between approximately 7% per annum. That's a big ask. And I don't know what they're going to come out with in COP26 next month, but all the initial indications seem to be that we don't quite have the answers yet. Now, if we continue along the way that we have been warming, we are definitely going to be somewhere between about 3 and 4 degrees. In fact, the right-hand side figure that you see are under worst case conditions. This is directly from the IPCC report that was released in August. Under worst case conditions, the IPCC says that we will probably be closer to 6 degrees by 2100. And if we are closer to anything like between 4 to 6 degrees by 2100, you can kiss human society goodbye. So what will happen, whether it is, even 2 degrees, according to many scientists, is a red line. So if we go up to even 3 degrees, this is something I wrote some time back about, 3 degrees roughly, we're going to have extreme heat wave. We're going to have extreme weather events. We're going to have sea rise of at least 1 meter, if not 2 meters by 2100. The Arctic ice, its extent is going to reduce drastically. There are going to be food and water shortages, deprivation, malnutrition, disease. The rate of mortality and morbidity will increase. Climate refugees, Bangladesh alone will have anything like 5 to 8 crore climate refugees. That means they have lost their land permanently, lost their homes permanently. Food and water security will be lost. Hunger will increase. Forests and biodiversity will go. Employment, work opportunities will be lost. Disruption of social and political orders, and increase in global conflict. Now, I'm going to point out just 1 or 2 key examples of what are called feed forward. You see, as warming happens, some of the things that will happen, in fact, will increase the warming even faster. Now, the Greenland ice sheet is a massive ice sheet, which is 2 to 3 kilometers in thickness. And it contains something like about 2.8 crore cubic kilometers. If that melts, that's fresh water, and gets into the Atlantic Ocean, then sea rise will be 7.2 meters. Of course, it won't happen immediately. It'll take about 2 or 3 centuries for it to happen. It'll be about 7 meters high. Now, a good lot of the coastal areas, coastal cities, not just in India, but all over the world, will be lost. The thermohaline circulation will weaken. And if that happens, thermohaline circulation is a massive, what is called a convection current. It's a belt both at the bottom of the all the 3 major oceans as well as on the surface. And this actually, what it does is it redistributes the heat from the equator towards the poles. It's like a huge radiator, so to speak. It's a heat exchanger. It's a natural heat exchanger. If all that fresh water in Greenland melts and gets into the oceans, then this will weaken and it will completely disrupt the conveyor belt, and that which actually influences the global climate in all the continents. As you know, El Nino impacts our monsoon, and El Nino happens just off the coast of Chile in the Pacific Ocean. So this is one of the things. The other thing that will happen with the thermohaline thermohaline circulation weakening, is going to be that in the North Sea, just above Britain, this is called the kidney of the world. There is a lot of carbon dioxide that is sequestered there, an unusual amount of carbon dioxide that's sequestered there, that will weaken. So this is what we're doing to ourselves. Why is a question that we need to ask ourselves. The permafrost in Alaska and Siberia, if it melts, billions of tons of methane will come out. Methane is 25 times more, it causes more, 1 kilogram of methane will cause warming, which is 25 times more than 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide. The Arctic ice extent, that's already reducing, as you can see, and it'll be gone. It's just a matter of a couple of centuries. And if that goes, then the reflectivity, or what is called albedo, will decrease. And the reflectivity of an ice sheet is 90%, whereas that of water is only 6%. So this is called a feed-forward mechanism. That is, black or green water, dark green water, will absorb a lot more of the incoming radiation from sunlight. And all this, warming is going to cause things like fires, which he's just talked about, increase of frequency and intensity of cyclones, which we're already seeing, and increase in mortality. As you can see, it is the developing countries which are going to suffer more than this whole thing, and so on. Now, a word about climate justice, in fact, more than a word about climate justice. Who has really caused this problem? It's Europe and Northern America, because they are the ones who really burnt coal, burnt oil, burnt a lot of gas. Now, if you look at the whole problem, North nations with 16% of the global population today have emitted 70% of the carbon dioxide that has been emitted so far. Their GDP, they created wealth with all that energy that they used. Their per capita GDP is $45,000 per person per annum. South nations is 5,000. India's, as you know, is somewhere in the region of about $2,400 or $2,500 per person per annum. Okay. Now, if you look at the per capita emissions, USA is 17.5 ton carbon dioxide per person per annum. Afghanistan, 0.3. So South nations have been emitting only for the last 3 decades. And if you look at the per capita historic emissions of North and South nations, the ratio is massive. The North nations is 1,200 tons per living person. South nations is only about 85. India is even lower. It's somewhere in the region of 40. So you can see who's really caused the problem. The problem is that COP 25, 26, or whatever it is, have collapsed 2 problems. And they are therefore not able to solve these issues. One problem is to bring down the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, bring down the emissions. That is largely a scientific and technical issue. The other is how do you then say allow India to develop? Because what is India's stand in the COP? They say that we have a right to develop just as you develop. And so don't try to tell us not to burn coal or not to burn oil or whatever it is. Now, as long as you look at this problem from a nationalistic perspective, excuse me, which is the way we've been going about doing it, we can't solve this problem. And in fact, this is exactly what is going to happen in COP26. And the North nations will say, okay, if you don't listen to what we're saying, then the money that we have allocated for giving to the developing countries in order to replace technology, not that they have technology, they don't really have those technologies, they will withhold, which is what they've done so far. So these are two absolutely irreconcilable issues which are being brought to the table as if they are one issue, and they cannot be solved within the paradigm of nation states. This is one of the major things that we need to understand, that it's only by people of the world getting together onto one platform, more or less, that we can solve this problem. Okay. Who's going to suffer? As you can see from this picture, I'm not going to get into details. I'm going to just sort of bullet point these things. You can kindly note down your questions and ask me at the end, and I can get into them. It's again the developing countries which are going to be the most affected. And in fact, South Asia, and what is not shown here is the Sahel region of Africa. These are the two regions which actually are going to be the hardest hit. These are the two regions which are going to be hardest hit by climate change. They are considered to be the two most vulnerable spots for climate change. So let's talk about our own region, South Asia. There are two countries which are going under. The first is Bangladesh. The entire Sundarbans region, if warming goes up to about 3 degrees, Dhaka and Kolkata will be underwater by 2100, as you can see. Now, these are models that we use to predict these things. And as you can see, the sea literally goes almost up to the India border, Meghalaya border out here. This is what is likely to happen. And I've been to both sides of the Sundarbans as a scientist working for UNAP. And please believe me, the people here in Sundarbans on the Bangladesh side, beautiful area, are much poorer than the Indians on this, the Indians in the Sundarbans area here. They have no other means to survive except to walk out. They're going to be 5 to 8 climate refugees, and the only thing they can do is to walk out. Bangladesh has a population density of 1200 or something per square kilometer. India is about 400. The only thing that they can do, they can't buy plane tickets. They can't even buy train tickets. They can only walk into India. Now, if we are a humane society, we're going to take them in and say that you did not cause the problem, someone else did. Whoever caused the problem, we as a humane society will take you in until such time as the world as a whole wakes up to this problem and takes care of you collectively. If we are not, then I won't talk about the rest of it. There will be conflict. Okay. But Maldives, one of the most beautiful places I've seen anywhere in the world. Absolutely. I've snorkeled out there. That was part of my job. The kind of fish and corals I've seen there are just mind-blowing. And the whole of the Maldives, more or less, is going to disappear. 5 lakh people, but much more than that. What has Maldives contributed? Not even 0.01% of the historic emissions. Bangladesh, what has it contributed to the historic emissions of greenhouse gases? 0.3%. And yet they're going to suffer. Pakistan and Afghanistan, on the other side, are going to be absolutely stressed out. Why? What is stressed? Why? Pakistan has only one major river, the Indus or Sindh. And that comes from the Karakoram Plains, which is a colder region where precipitation is much lower. So 60% of the water in Pakistan that flows into the Indus River is because of glacial melt. Whereas in India, the Brahmaputra and the Ganga, they depend on glacial melt only to the extent of about 10 to 20%. Now, if you look at the Amu Darya, which contributes 50% of the water to Afghanistan, then Amu Darya gets 77% of its water from glacial melt because it also comes from the Karakoram range. Now, the minute you have a water shortage, and the Pakistanis are fully aware of this because in my discussions with Pakistani environment ministry people, they mentioned this quite openly, in fact. And they said that even if there is a 5% drop in the water of the Indus, that there would be an increase in malnutrition to the extent of 17% amongst the under 10-year-olds in Pakistan. Not just that, the major problem that Pakistan is going to face or Afghanistan is going to face is that the minute there is a water shortage, different regions of these countries, in fact, are going to go into conflict, just the way Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are conflicting. And Karnataka, mind you, uses a particular doctrine in court saying because the water source is in our land, all the water is ours, and it's by our grace that we are giving Tamil Nadu something. And Tamil Nadu argues in the Supreme Court that while the Kannadigas were still in the caves, we as Delta farmers were using them for 1,000 years before the Kannadigas woke up. We have what is called the first water users' rights, which is a recognized right in the world or in most parts of the world. Both have a point of view and both rely on legal doctrines, but both are absolutely irreconcilable, which is part of the reason why Israel, Jordan, and Syria are at war over the Jordan River. That's another story. I won't get into that. So if Sindh doesn't get water from Punjab in Pakistan, then Sindh is going to say the same thing. The downstream farmers of, let us say, the Krishna River tell the upstream farmers of the Koyna Canal. The downstream farmers, don't get water because the upstream farmers take, much more water. They say, why should we be with you altogether? And basically they'll say, we will separate. And water in Pakistan is an issue because ultimately they have just that one river. And therefore we need to look at this whole problem, not merely in a nationalistic point of view, because if there is a disturbance in Pakistan, ultimately where are they going to go? Are they going to go westwards? Who's going to accept them? Are they going to come eastwards? They have problems. So these are not problems, these problems of climate change, which can be solved very easily. In fact, very difficult problems, and nationalism is going to play an impeding role in all this. Now, other than that, if you look at, I won't again explain this whole thing, just see the darker colors. Pakistan is going to become water stressed in due course of time. And so is Afghanistan, as you can see out here. So this is what's going to happen to the west of us. To the north of us, Bhutan and Nepal. Now, if you see this is called a glacial lake. Now, below every glacier, more or less every glacier, there is a lake, and it's held by a natural dam of mud and rubble. Now, as warming happens and more water gets into this lake, this dam will burst. And for literally 100 to 150 kilometers, everything gets washed out. Villages, cattle, farms, people, dams. As you can see, this dam is a dam in Pakistan that just got bashed. These are called gloughs. And there is an increasing frequency of gloughs happening in the entire Himalayan tract because of warming that has been happening. Now, India also, as you know, and recently in Chamoli had such a glacial melt, and several people died downstream. Okay, what's going to happen to India? India, extreme weather events. We've had several of them. Very heavy rainfall in Bombay. Kedarnath killed more than 5,000 people. Very heavy rainfall in Chennai. Heat waves all over India several times. Heavy rainfalls in several places and so on. Now, this is the Kedarnath. This is a satellite picture of the Kedarnath cloudburst. I went here and took this picture soon after the extreme weather event in Kerala. This is in Idukki district. Now, if you see these roots of the plantations, they are much shallower. They don't grip the soil the way that the forest species grip the soil. The minute you have, roots which do not grip the soil, what will happen? The minute you have heavy rainfall, there's going to be a landslide and rock slides. In fact, 400 out of the 500 people who died in Kerala in 2018, August 17th, as I remember the day, died because of landslides, landslips, and rockfall, not downstream because of floods. There they had time to evacuate. Here they had no time at all. Heat waves in North India. Okay, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen to Bombay. This we do all these by using models. That this is Bombay as of now, and I used to stay in Bombay somewhere here. In fact, Chunavatti, yeah, somewhere here. Okay. Now, as you can see, this is a 2-degree rise by 2100. My house is almost gone, and 3-degree, my house is definitely gone, and 4-degree, half of Bombay is gone, or a third of Bombay is gone. This is what's going to happen. This, okay. The third tipping point is massive inequality between people, between nations. It's growing. Again, the top 1%'s income and wealth has been growing. It's much more than the total wealth of the bottom 50%. Okay. And if you look at the rate of growth actually, which I have not shown in this graph, of the top 10% is much faster than that of the bottom 50%. Now, this inequality is not good for society because it ultimately ends up in conflict. Okay. So if you look at the countries where disparity is great, what is in economics called the Gini index is high. India is one of the top countries in the world where, in fact, disparity has been growing at a very fast rate. So that is where we are today. Okay. If you look at inequality between countries, as you can see here, I'm measuring it in terms of income out here, as against an average income, as against an average global energy expenditure of 2 tons per person per annum. You can see that the US is nearly 7 tons, whereas India is only 0.7 tons, 10 times lower. So there is this disparity, and this disparity, in fact, is growing, except in India and China, which have been fast growers for the last 3 decades or so. But the other countries are not, the other developing countries are not doing as well as India or China. But within India and China, for that matter of fact, the internal disparity has been growing. Okay. What is the consequence? Ultimately, it's going to be, 140 million people have died just in the last century because of 3 wars: interstate wars, colonial wars, civil wars, world hunger. And right now, after COVID, in fact, hunger is expected to increase in India, disease, etc. And we are not going to be able to get almost 1 billion people below the poverty line of $1.75 per annum for the next 100 years. We're not. This is what economists tell us. We're not going to be able to get them from below the poverty line, even if we grow at the current rate, provided things like climate change and peak oil and such other, global disasters don't hit us. Now, why? Why? You wonder why. Why? Because we humans have this ability to create knowledge of energy sciences, which is so fundamental for extraction of anything from nature. Other creatures do not have this ability. And so what happens is that they are, this is a picture I took in Kenya. They are very satisfied with what, in fact, they have for just survival, which is 98% of their energy is for just survival, 2% is for reproduction and evolution. They draw energy with their claws and fangs. They do not draw energy with their heads. We are able to do it. We are much weaker than the lion or the tiger, but we are able to do it. And in fact, we are able to vanquish the lion or the tiger because we know how to create knowledge of energy conversion. This is the difference between other species and us. And this has made us arrogant enough to believe that we really don't require other species, which is what one person told me some years back. Why do we need a crocodile? Isn't it a risk to us? I wanted to be polite. I said, sir, it probably we are a risk to the crocodile. Now, uh, I will get into a little bit of concept out here because that is very important to understand. For long years, it's only humans that have learned to create surplus, right from the time we were hunter-gatherers till today. Now, how do we create surplus? We invest 1 unit of energy and dig out coal or oil or whatever it is, or make crops or forests. And I'm getting an echo for some reason. Okay, fine, let's stop. And what we're able to do is harvest 20 joules or 30 joules out of coal. Let's say 20 joules. The 19 joules is our profit. Now, by saying I have invested that 1 unit of energy, I say that that entire 20 units is mine, 19 is my profit. The next year, if I invest, 2 joules or 2 units, then I get 40 joules and 38 is my profit. And that becomes my personal property. Now, this whole question of privatization of nature started about 5,000 years back with the advent of slavery. The minute I want to increase my profit, then I try to get more and more out of nature, extract more and more out. So there is this compulsion, in fact, to get more and more out of nature. So this is one way in which we have grown. And all of economics keeps on telling us more or less until very recent times, when some economists have started saying, no, growth is not necessarily all that good, have been telling us that, yeah, listen, we need to grow in order to develop. So that is one way of doing it. We extract more energy which I'll come to that part. Who really created is the question. Okay. The second is by conquest. And that's what the British did to us. So with each technology, like the harness and the stirrup or whatever else, the use of fossil fuels, etc., what we've done, what some countries did do was they went and colonized other countries. And that's what Britain did to us, or for that matter of fact, many other countries. And from India alone, now we have an estimate that they extracted $45 trillion out of this country and they developed, right? These are the colonies of the British, the Dutch, the French, and so on. And this is how they grew rich, actually, by taking resources really from other parts of the world, by using technology to conquer them, okay? The third, which is a little more difficult to understand, but I will put it as simply as I can, is what is called unequal exchange. Now, in normal parlance, you say, all right, basically, if I go to the market and I spend 100 rupees on something, let's say a chocolate or whatever it is, I get 100 rupees back. But let us talk in energy terms. Now, in energy terms, now 10 or 100 units of energy should exchange for 100 units of energy. But when you start looking at the agricultural and industrial sector in India, or for that matter of fact, anywhere else, you find that actually 60 units of energy of the industrial sector exchanges for 100 units of energy that the agricultural sector gives the industrial sector. How does this happen? This happens because the energy that is used by the agricultural sector of the sun, direct solar energy that is required for photosynthesis, is not valued or costed. Fossil fuels are costed, okay? Animate energy is costed, whether it be of bullocks or humans, okay? But energy like dung or energy like, direct solar energy is not costed, and therefore more energy basically is given by the agricultural sector to the industry and the service sectors as compared to what the energy the industrial sector gives the agricultural sector. Now, when you translate this into money terms, this becomes profit. That 40 joules of energy becomes profit. And this is how any country which is more dependent on uncosted energy like India and other developing countries always lose out to countries, in fact, which are using fossil fuels, namely Europe and Northern America. This is how America grew rich, not through colonies, but through unequal exchange. Just like you have unequal exchange between industry and agriculture, those countries which are more dependent on sunlight for their economy lose out to countries which do not depend on sunlight and actually use energy which is costed. Okay, so this is how it happens, that there is a huge difference between the economic equation and the energy equation, and this is the point that ecological economics makes, that ultimately economics has to follow the laws of thermodynamics, which then actually control the laws of the energy equation. Okay, now what's the root cause of this double grab that is happening? We are grabbing from other species the energy that belongs to those species, and that grab that we are doing, that stealing that we are doing from other species, ever since agriculture started, okay, we are distributing it unequally within human society itself. That is, somebody who's an owner gets more, somebody who's a worker gets less. It's a double steal, double whammy that's going on. As a species, we are stealing from other species, and as a society, the rich are stealing from the poor. This is what is really happening. And so, the first steal that we are doing is anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism is what it does as an ideology is it legitimizes unbridled use of nature for the benefit of humans. Okay, and what the other thing does, whether it be in slavery or in feudalism or in capitalism, is it legitimizes the unequal distribution of that surplus between human beings itself. So finally, what happens is that the Dalit, the Adivasi, the women, the worker, these are the people who are really hit the most, particularly in developing countries. The central question here really is, what gives humans the right to say that they own that coal mine? Who made the coal and how much energy was used, in fact, to make that 1 joule of coal? There is no literature. And whatever research we have done on this indicates that 1 joule of coal, the coal was made by the earth by burying dead vegetation and dead living beings, other living beings, dead animals, for the last 300 million years. It baked it and made coal and gas and oil. Now, at the very minimum, the amount of energy that was used to do this, it takes about 40 to 45,000 joules, somewhere in that order. Joules of energy was used by Mother Nature to make 1 joule of coal. What gives me the right to say that I am the owner of that coal mine?
They give a long bell.
Okay. So how much time do I have?
So some of them are in the classroom. Other section that.
Okay. Now, fine.
Only for Catholics.
So there are three critical questions. How much energy can we take? Where will the energy come from in future? And how do we distribute it? We have to answer these questions. And to answer these questions, I think, the answers really are then lead up to, are we really part of nature, or are we apart from it? And so far we've been behaving as if we are apart from it. Do we follow a global outlook of gain maximization for a few or risk minimization for all, like all the other species do? And if we had risk minimization for all species, then basically theory of value, whether it be Ricardian or whether it be of Adam Smith lineage, they fail. Okay, and we have to change our outlook. Sorry, there's a typo there. It's not jeep the climate, but keep the climate, change the economy. What does it really mean? That something that the latest IPCC report also has accepted, that if we become a more equitable society, as we have a far better chance, in fact, of controlling climate. This is, in fact, what is called the SSP1. This is the best model that they say. If we become more equitable, we have a far better chance than any other assumption of being able to keep to a 1.5 degree Celsius warming. So we have to do two things. We have to become a society which is far more equitable, and we have to power down. How much? How much of energy? Some scientists, in fact, say 90%. My own calculations indicate something like about 50 to 55%. But which political party is willing to accept this today? Not today, but they will have to accept it tomorrow as they learn that, in fact, we have to become not an antagonist to nature, but we have to become part of it. And nature is unable to give us more than what it actually has. And that is what nature is saying, that I just don't have. And we're trying to extract through means of war. Okay, so what does it mean? Technology shifts. We have to move from high energy to low energy systems. Our future materials are going to come out of plants, not out of non-renewable resources like ores. So we are on the cusp of a massive change, a change which is epochal of a sort we've never seen before, in fact. Okay, what is the mission statement? We've defined the vision statement. We have to move from gain maximization for a few to risk minimization for all. From keep the climate, change the economy if necessary. Now, if that is the vision statement, what is our mission statement? We have to become sustainable. We have to become equitable. We have to become a society which is decentralized, democratic, transparent, and where there is transparent governance. We have to try and restitute. Why do I say restitute the environment and not restore? Because some of it is gone. Some of the species are gone. We cannot get them back. We are not gone. So we have to restitute, restore the environment to the extent possible. And we have to bring in aspects of climate justice. We have those who are responsible for loss and damage must take responsibility. What that responsibility means, we will discuss later. Okay? I'm not talking in terms of retribution and so on immediately. Let them at least say, yes, I'm responsible for it. Right? And what we need to say is that those people who have created wealth out of the carbon emissions, let them share it. Isn't this what Jesus told us? And the risks that they've caused to the other countries, let them share these risks. These have enormous meanings, which means those 5 to 8 Bangladeshi refugees, climate core refugees, must be given safe homes, good homes in those countries which have created this problem, proportional to the amount that they've created the problem. Right? We are not going to be very exact about these things, and we're going to look at it dispassionately, we're going to look at it compassionately, but something of this sort, human compassion, has to come in, and that's not there in the COP26 negotiation at all. That has to come in, and it's for all of you to bring that in, to tell our government and other governments that compassion and human values have to be brought in. So these are some of the philosophical, economic, and political agendas. What are the social agendas, much more of which will be talked about tomorrow? What are the individual programs that can be taken up? Well, these are simpler. Cycle pathways, cycle stands, which to an extent Hyderabad Cycling Club has done here in Hyderabad, but let us popularize them. Bicycle sharing schemes, let us popularize. It's already happening, but let's popularize them. 500 cities all over the world now are doing it, but yet they're not popular enough. Encourage neighborhood schools. Our computations show that if you abolish coaching classes and encourage neighborhood schools, we can save something like 8 million liters of diesel and petrol. 50 crores. In fact, it'll be much more because prices have gone up. We have to reduce trip distance and trip frequency, and change the trip mode to cycles, to pedestrianizing roads, using public transport, discouraging private transport, ultimately probably even abolishing public transport at some point, private transport at some point. Compensate farmers for carbon sequestration and the air pollution related crop yield losses. Encourage biomass energy solutions. Okay, and so on and so forth. Make your campus, for example, carbon neutral, and we'll help you do that because we have scientists and engineers who know how to do this. there'll be more discussion about this tomorrow by Prasad, by day after by Prasad and others on such issues. Okay, individual solutions, what are they? Encourage walking, cycling. I cycle, for example, most times. I mean, Montfort, the last time I went there, I went on a cycle, even though it's about 9 or 10 kilometers from my house. Encourage rainwater harvesting, minimize, go on for, what is called non-chemical farming, whether you call it permaculture or organic farming or whatever it is. Avoid using energy guzzling devices, encourage low energy consuming houses. Like here is a small example of an experiment that we did in Rajasthan sometime back. We built a tin shed with a, painted it black outside. It becomes a black body. It absorbs a lot of sun, radiation, and therefore the air inside it becomes hot. Connected 2 pipes to it, one to the house and one on top. During summer, you don't connect the pipe, the top pipe to the house, you leave it open. So what happens is hot air goes out and air from inside the house goes into the tin shed. You put a khaskhas on a window the other side and we measured the temperature. With this device, the temperature came down in Rajasthan by 3 to 4 degrees. You connect the top pipe, plastic pipe, bendable, flexible pipe to the house in winter, where it's cold in Rajasthan, and the temperature went up by 3 to 4 degrees in winter. There are all these very simple, very, elegant sort of methods that can be used. And right now, tomorrow, you will listen to Asim, who will talk about how we are designing heat reduction, cheap technologies for heat stress alleviation in slums. And he's doing a wonderful program out there. And heat stress is going to kill thousands of people in India alone. It already has. And as temperatures go up, it's going to kill thousands of people. Now, a last example I'm going to give you. Here is a beautiful example that, and we have several such experiments that we've had children do. This child put a tulsi plant into a bell jar and he lit a candle in it without the tulsi plant and timed how long it would stay lit. The minute the oxygen depleted, the candle will go out. He put a tulsi plant, put it in sunlight, and lit the candle. And again, he timed it and found that it stayed lit for a longer period. Now, what he did was computed the amount of leaf space and computed the carbon dioxide to oxygen ratio, that per square centimeter ratio. And then he did something very interesting. He found out what is the total carbon dioxide emission from vehicles in his small town. And also he found, roughly computed how many trees there were in the town and what is the total leaf area of a tree, and said, therefore, we need so many more trees in this small town. Now, these are all things that school teachers can do very easily, have done, in fact, and there are several such experiments I can talk to you about subsequently. This is what we need to do. The message has to be taken to people. They need to stand up and say, no, we are not, our future is not to be jeopardized. Now, there are only 2 forks in the road, and there are only 1 or 2 more slides. One is if we go along the trodden path, we are going to lose World War Z, that we've been fighting with nature. The other is that we have to get together and we have to say, no, this has to stop. Otherwise, we as a species is at high risk of extinction, in fact. And we have to end our resource conflicts. We have to move out of anthropocentrism and private ownership of wealth. We have to have collective, usufruct rights. What Shiva gave as a boon, we have to use it collectively, not individually. So this is a massive challenge. I mean, it's a challenge of a sort that we have just not seen anything like this before. 3 tipping points: global warming, resource crunch, and massive growing inequality. Now, to do this, no single party, no single country, no single organization can do it. It's only such massive epochal changes history has told us can only be done by people. And therefore, we as people, whether we belong to different religions, philosophies, political affiliations, nations, social structures, have to get together. There's no choice. So we have to form a rainbow coalition. And I will end by saying that I thought was the message the Pope gave when he said his critique of consumerism and irresponsible development, environmental degradation, and global warming, he called to all people that the world has to shift to a unified global action and he highlights the urgency of this problem. This is his message. And this is what we are saying. We need a rainbow coalition. We need it today. COP26 is not going to be able to solve the problem until we tell them what to do. And that is what we need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sagar. Somebody put down in the chat box. What you have given us is the doomsday, not of the future, but doomsday that is already here. You started with that very interesting story of the origins of Kaveri and the pledge that was made when this great river was given to humanity, that the waters of this river will be shared not by just human beings, but by all of nature. And this promise has been breached. World has been at war, as you said, human beings with other human beings with nature. And it is this war that continues in a much faster pace than what was 300 years ago, 400 years ago. The points that we were talking about. One thing that you told us is that there are limits to growth. There are limits to consumption, and we cannot go on the way that we are going today. You talked very elaborately with great details and great amount of data, picturization, what climate crisis means and how it will impact human beings, and especially the South Asian countries, how it impact. You took very concrete examples of how climate crisis will very deeply impact the poorest nations of the world and the poorest peoples of the world. I still remember in 2015, the cabinet, Prime Minister and his cabinet in Maldives meeting under the sea, saying that if this is not, if climate crisis is not addressed adequately by the global community, Maldives will be among the first countries to go down the sea. Will the world accept us? I think this symbolic, iconic action of the Maldivian cabinet, I think, is significant to us. And you gave us the whole who is responsible for climate change, the climate crisis. Obviously, it is the rich in every nation. It is the rich, it is the countries of the north that has gained from using of fossil fuels in an uncontrolled manner to create their wealth. It is time that they share not only the wealth that they have created through colonization, through conquest of nature itself, but also share the impact of climate crisis. Very interesting point that you made, that humans draw energy from their head, unlike other creatures. That gives human beings a sense of dominance that I think is at the root of what we can call the climate crisis. You gave us a vision statement of how things can be reversed. You gave us a mission statement with very succinct points of what we can do as institutions, as individuals, as collectives. But one thing that you very, very strongly emphasized on is no religious congregation, no religious group, no caste, no class, no national boundaries can resolve this issue. We have to do it together. You talked of the rainbow collision that is necessary. You quoted Pope Francis, who is asking in his encyclical Laudato Si that what is needed today is unified action. I think we have to move from anthropocentrism that has been the focus, especially of the biblical traditions, the Abrahamic traditions, to biocentrism that includes all creation, the whole community of life, and further to ecocentrism that would embrace the whole of reality. And I think this is a challenge that Montfortans, we need to embrace it, not alone, together, not just among ourselves, but among all peoples. We are present in 34 different countries of the world, and I think we are extremely privileged to take this opportunity and take on this responsibility. So thank you very much, Sagar, for setting us on, as somebody wrote, each of the points that you have made could be a 1 hour talk, but we have been just introduced to what we are facing today and how much more we need to learn, but not so much learn, how much more we need to do. And I think this is a resolve that we shall together take. I have many reflections, questions that have come in the chat box, but I would, there is, Brother George, can we take 5 or 7 minutes more, at least to answer 1 or 2 questions that have come up?
5 minutes more.
Okay, 5 minutes more, Mr. Sagar. There are a couple of questions that maybe I'll read these questions together. There is Saijupi Michael saying, your talk is very informative. My question is, the problems are very serious, sir. Do you think in the present pedagogy of different levels of education, these issues are sufficiently addressed and communicated to the growing population, to the young? Is it not an absolute need, and how can we do it in our own context? There is a second question that came up in the context of the use of fossil fuels. This is from Brother Varghese Mandapam. How can we balance between development and preservation of natural resources? These are fundamental questions. So we shall take only these 2 questions. I am sure the audience have lots of questions that we would want to ask. And I'm sure Sagar Dhara's email, with his permission, his email addresses can be shared so that if there are some questions that may come, we will be able to answer. So we will listen to Sagar Dhara just briefly answering these questions, because these are huge essays in themselves. We will briefly listen to his answer and then we will close this session. Sagar.
I'll take the second question first, because right now, in fact, several of us have been debating this question. And unfortunately, I'm working on my daughter's computer. Yeah, if everybody kindly mutes their mics, that would be good. Okay. That's $1 million question, and there is no answer to it, because it all depends on how we define what is injury to the environment. And if you put 10 people into the room, you'll have 24 answers to it. And that is what has been happening today. Somebody asked me a question some time back. Today there is an entire school which talks in terms of degrowth economics. And in fact, I have contributed a chapter to a book on degrowth some time back, some 5 years back or so. That is the first book on degrowth in India, which contains quite some stalwart authors like Jayati Ghosh and Vandana Shiva and so on and so forth. So the question was, to what extent do we degrow? And we don't have an answer. Now, whether growth or degrowth, the thing is that your energy situation is going to make you change, because you do not, our assessment is you do not really have the energy resources for the future to be able to expend energy at the rate of 14 gigatons of oil equivalent, which is what we're using right now. That is commercial energy. There's another 4 tons of gigatons of sunlight that we're using. Fine. So in any case, the situation is going to force us to reduce our energy. But to what level? Like I said, some scientists, in fact, talk about a degrowth of 90. These are scientists, and they've written papers in peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals. These are not politicians. You know, like I said, my computations indicate that we need to degrow by about 55%. But there is absolutely no unanimity or understanding as to what is the level of injury which all of us consider, the injury to the environment that all of us consider acceptable. That debate has to be, in fact, increased at a furious pace, because we are now running out of time. So that is the answer to your first question. We need to debate it in schools, in colleges, in offices, everywhere, because this is an extremely important question. That is where I set out those 3 questions. One of the questions is, how much energy do we use? How do we distribute it? And where do we get it from? These are 3 very central questions, and they have not been answered yet. Okay, the second question, which is actually the first question which I was asked, is how do we do this? There is an interplay between every individual playing a role. And even if we made individual contributions, like did vermicomposting, did rainwater harvesting, is it going to change the world? No. Why? Because anthropocentrism and privatization of nature are ideologies and structures which have now existed for 5,000 years. They have built deep roots. Both contribute to growth. Now, something which is 5,000 years old is not something which you can remove just by individual action. Yeah, but without why? Because these are political, ideological, philosophical structures which have been built, ideologies and structures which have been built, and you cannot remove them. So you need an action which actually transcends all these fields. But who will do it? Unless every person contributes more or less in every possible way, until people rise up and say, I don't want this, you cannot get this job done. Like I said, this is the biggest epochal change that the world is going to see. Either it changes the world and survives, or it perishes. There is no other way in this thing. And for that to happen, every act, whether it be rainwater harvesting, whether it be planting trees, or whatever it is, will have to be done to show that we are all committed to that in every possible way. So it is a complete, let us say, link between a local action and a global action that is required. Will that happen? How will it happen? I really don't know, and nobody seems to know this. All I can say is we can't quite predict how it's going to happen. And please believe me, we are debating this at fairly high academic levels right now, with thinkers who have global names and so on and so forth. And nobody really has an answer. All we know, in fact, very recently, I wrote 3 days back to a person saying that the whole question of vanguardism and so on is going to fail. The whole question of mass action by itself will not work. It's going to be different in different parts of the world. It's going to be in time different in different places. So we really don't have an answer. The only thing I can say is every one of us to that extent must get involved in this, and therefore change these superstructures and the underlying global economic structures and social structures. That's the only way I can see the way forward.
Thank you, Sagar, for those taking those questions, particularly bringing home to us the need for thinking about living, debating, on degrowth as the future of the world. If the future of the world, the future generations, the civilization as we know is to survive in some form. And the second issue that the only way is that we take responsibility. Take responsibility as individuals to begin with, take responsibility as collectives. And I think that is the hope on which it's the last straw. The last straw for survival of the world, survival of the civilization, survival of the ecosystems is only by taking responsibility. Degrowth and responsibility. I think these are two important issues that we need to communicate. Communicate in our classrooms, communicate in our field of work, communicate to whoever is willing to listen to. And I think that is a mission that we all, each of us, need to embrace. Thank you for that last pointers of hope that you have pointed out. So thank you very much, Sagar. You have taken your time, not just to deliver this talk, but then took time to help us organize this 3 days conference by connecting me, connecting others to other resource persons. And we look forward to the resource persons tomorrow, the panel tomorrow, and the panel on the day after. The panel tomorrow, for the information of all, will particularly have people who have been looking at solutions at micro levels, at macro levels, but looking for solutions. And the day after, we will also have panelists who will come. In fact, I'm hoping that Miriam Villela, the executive director of the Earth Charter, will join us from Costa Rica. There are other eminent speakers that are lined up who will again talk about what is it that we can do together from their own experiences of connecting people, connecting institutions, and connecting organizations. So we really look forward to tomorrow and day after. Thank you very much, Sagar, for this time with us. Thank you.